flight had barely begun boarding when people started shuffling into their seats, dragging carry-ons, adjusting jackets, and squeezing past one another with the usual travel exhaustion. But for seat 12F, life was not usual. That seat belonged to Daniel Carter, a single dad whose world revolved around the little girl, now curled up against his arm, clutching a ragged pink bunny with ears bent from years of love. Daniel wasn't the type who drew attention. He was quiet, reserved, the kind of man who slipped into a room and out again without leaving a trace. His daughter, Emma, was all the brightness he allowed himself to carry. She had his eyes, his determination and, despite everything they had been through, his unshakable hope. To the other passengers, he was just another weary parent trying to settle in for a long flight. But hidden under the simple sweatshirt and worn jeans was a story no one would have guessed. The engines roared as the plane taxied down the runway. Emma pressed her face against the window, pointing with excitement. "Daddy, look. True, another plane." Her voice carried the innocent thrill of a child, untouched by the heaviness her father bore. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, but inside, his chest tightened. He couldn't look at jets without remembering. An hour into the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed and conversation softened, a ripple of unease moved through the aircraft. "Truth," the captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We've been asked to hold in a pattern until further notice." Passengers exchanged nervous glances. A holding pattern mid-flight was rare. Out of the window, Emma spotted them, first two sleek silhouettes streaking across the sky, flanking a passenger jet like silent guardians. "Daddy," she whispered, eyes wide. "Those are fighter jets." Daniel's throat went dry. F-22 Raptors, fast, lethal, unmistakable. And the sight of them pulled him backward in time, to days he hadn't spoken of since he hung up his uniform. The flight attendants moved quickly up the aisle, whispering between themselves, their usual practiced calm, tinged with urgency. The captain's voice returned, tighter now. "If we have a passenger on board with the call sign in hand, please identify yourself immediately." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Passengers scanned one another, puzzled. Emma turned her face up toward her father. "Daddy," she said softly, "that's you." Daniel froze. For years, he had buried Iron Hand, the name stitched into his flight suit, the identity that had once defined him. He had walked away from the Air Force after his wife's passing, choosing to raise Emma away from the chaos of deployment and war. He hadn't thought anyone still remembered. But apparently they did. The attendant stopped beside 12F, her eyes searching. "Sir, are you?" Daniel nodded once, quietly as if admitting a secret, and in that moment, the atmosphere on the plane shifted. Word spread like fire in dry grass, "He's the one." Iron Hand. Outside, the Raptors adjusted their formation, banking slightly in salute. Passengers pressed against the windows, their fear replaced with awe. Emma tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, why are they here for you?" Daniel swallowed hard. Memories flooded back, missions flown in silence, decisions made in seconds that saved countless lives. The night he led his squadron through impossible odds, and never lost a single wingman. But none of that compared to the quiet mission he'd chosen after. Raising a daughter who believed the world was safe, because he was beside her. "They're here," he said softly, "because once, a long time ago, I promised to protect people. And sometimes, the world remembers promises like that." The pilot's voice broke again, through the speakers, this time with reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, Iron Hand is on board. Please join me in honoring a man whose service made flights like this one possible." And then, in a surreal moment, every passenger, men, women, children, rose to their feet in that narrow cabin, standing at attention as if instinct compelled them. Strangers saluted with tears in their eyes. A mother clutched her son's hand a little tighter. A veteran in row 20 whispered, "I never thought I'd see him." Daniel sat there, stunned, his daughter's small hand wrapped in his. He had never sought recognition, never wanted his name spoken aloud again in that way. All he had ever wanted was to be Emma's dad. But now, as the F-22s flew alongside, unwavering in formation, he realized something. Service didn't end with uniforms or call signs. Sometimes, the greatest mission of all was the unseen one, showing up, loving without condition, and carrying on even when the world no longer watched. Emma leaned into him, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, I think you're still a hero." And for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to believe she was right. The F-22s peeled away after escorting the passenger plane safely through its corridor of airspace. One banked left, the other right, both tipping their wings in a final salute before disappearing into the clouds. The cabin erupted in applause. Not the casual chimes here after a smooth landing, but a raw, heartfelt ovation that shook the fuselage. Daniel sat there in 12F, overwhelmed, his hand pressed to his daughter's. He had lived years in quiet, in anonymity, keeping the past tucked away like an old photograph hidden in a drawer. And yet here it was, crashing through the ordinary silence of his life, reminding him that the sacrifices of yesterday still mattered today. When the plane landed, the gate was crowded with people waiting. Not just family and travelers. Uniformed officers stood near the windows, flanked by ground crew. As Daniel carried Emma down the jet bridge, the murmur spread. Heads turned. Men and women in uniform straightened instinctively, their eyes following him. Emma looked up, her small arms looped around his neck. "Daddy. Why are they standing like that?" "They're showing respect," he whispered, kissing her hair. "Not for me, but for all of us who carried those promises." A young officer approached him. Truth, posture, sharp, voice steady. "It's an honor. My father flew under your command. He told me stories about Iron Hand, the man who wouldn't leave anyone behind. He said you saved his life." The officer's voice cracked, just slightly. "Because of you, I had a father growing up." Daniel blinked, his throat too tight to speak. He had never thought of it like that. How the decisions made in the skies could ripple through decades, shaping families' futures. Emma tugged at his hand gently. "See, Daddy. True heroes don't stop being heroes just because they come home." For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a single dad, trying to make it through another day. He wasn't just a man in 12F, forgotten by the world. He was both. Father and soldier, protector and provider. His past and his present didn't cancel each other out. They belonged together. Just like Emma's small hand belonged in his. That night, as they walked out of the terminal under the glow of city lights, Daniel didn't feel invisible anymore. The world had reminded him of who he was. But more importantly, his daughter had reminded him of why he kept going. And for the first time in years, he walked forward with his head high, carrying both his call sign and his little girl, knowing that in her eyes, and maybe in the eyes of others, he would always be enough.